Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be learning about variables in Java. Now first, we'll take a look at this program. Over here you can see that I have 5 printf statements and I'm basically just printing the value 6. Now I know this isn't a realistic program. You would never write this as a program to do something. But this is just an example to show how important variables are. Over here, let's say instead of printing 6, I want to print the value 3. Then I would have to change each and every value to 3. Even though I can do that, it's just time consuming and inefficient. Especially in a program where you use a particular value multiple times throughout the program, this is really inefficient. What we can do instead is use variables. And this is not the only place where you could use variables. Variables are also useful when you're taking input from a user to use it later on in your program. Now I know it doesn't make that much sense now, but eventually you will understand why variables are really useful. And now over here I have a value 8. And let's say I want to change every one of these values to 5. As we've seen, that's really hard. So what we'll do instead is we'll make this box over here which stores the value 8. And we'll give this box a name. We're going to call it num. Instead of using 8, we're going to use this num instead. Since num is equal to 8, it's the same as using the value 8. But now you notice that if I want to change the value to 5, I can just change the value in my yellow box. If I change num to 5, then we're going to be using the value 5. This is a lot easier than changing every one of these values. Here, num is basically acting as a variable. Now, an important thing that you should know is that the name that we give to a variable is not the name of the value. It's the name of the position that it occupies. If you look at this green box, let's say that this green box represents all the memory in our program. And a value, an integer, occupies a certain amount of memory in this green box. We're going to store this value in a variable, num. Num is the name of the position of this value. Num is not the name of the value 3. So when we use num in our program, we're just using whatever value is in num or is in that position. So if the position had a value a, we're going to be using a. If it had a decimal like 3.5, we're going to be using 3.5. Basically, our variables can store values of any data type. But how do we make a variable in Java? So now let's just look at the syntax for making a variable. Now our syntax is actually pretty simple. The first thing we need to mention is the data type of the variable. Because remember, different data types occupy different memory. So if I take an integer, it would probably occupy 32 bits, but a character would occupy only 12 bits. So I need to mention the data type of the value that this variable holds. After this, I need to mention the name of the variable. And after we write the name of the variable, we need to add what's called the assignment operator. And this is just the equals to symbol. All this does is it assigns whatever value is on the right of it to whatever is on the left of it. So in this case, it's going to assign whatever value I add over here to the variable. So on the right of the assignment operator, we're just going to add the value. And then we'll end it with a semicolon. What's obviously important is that the data type of this value should be the same as the data type that we mentioned over here. If it isn't the same, it's actually going to cause an error. Now let's just make a couple of variables. So we're going to make a variable of the int data type. So we're just going to write int. Then we're just going to give it a name. And this name could be literally anything. In this case, let's actually just call it Java. We'll write our equals to sign, which is the assignment operator. And we're going to give it some value. So we're just going to call it 5. Remember, my assignment operator is just assigning this value 5 to our variable Java. And since the data type of this value 5 is int, we don't see any error. Now you notice if I change this 5 to a 5.0, it causes an error because this is a double and this is an int. So let's just change it back to 5. So now let's just make another variable of the character data type. So we'll just say char a is equal to b. So b is a character and the data type of this variable is char. So it works perfectly well. And a is just the name of this variable. Now let's make a variable of the float data type. So we'll just say float b is equal to 3.5. You can see that this actually causes an error Because if you remember my data types video, you will know that a float will always have an f after it. So just add an f over here to tell the program that this is a float and not a double. And now we don't have an error. This is a float, this is also a float. And an obvious rule that you notice over here is that two different variables can't have the same name. So over here, if I make a variable of the double data type and call this b as well and give it a value like 4.6, you can see it's going to cause an error because there are two variables which both have the same name. So let's just change this to something like c, and you see that now we have no error. We have four variables of different data types. Another important thing is that two variables can still hold the same value. So I'll just make a different double variable with a different name called d, and now we'll give it the value 4.6. Since they're entirely different variables, we don't get any error. So variables are pretty simple, but there are a couple of terms that you need to understand. So the process by which we give the variable a data type is known as declaration. And the process by which we give it this value is known as assignment. That's why we call this operator the assignment operator. And this whole process where we give our variable its initial or its first value, it's known as initialization. We say initial value because if you haven't guessed already, you can change the value of a variable later on. So let's say later on in my program, I want to change the value of Java to something like 8. And I can do that. I can just say Java is equal to 8. And this will change the value in my variable Java to 8. By now you must have noticed something. When I change the value of my variable, I haven't mentioned my data type. This is because declaration, the process by which you give it the data type, only happens one time in your program. So if you mention the data type again, it's actually going to cause an error. You can change the value as many times as you want, but you can only declare it one time. That's at the beginning of your program. Now we're just going to add a println statement after this initialization and this change. So over here we'll add a println statement to print the value of Java, and over here we'll add another println statement again to print the value of Java. After our initialization, the value of Java is 5. So when I print Java, it's actually going to print 5. But then we change our value to 8. So when I print it a second time, it should print 8. And when I run the program, we notice that it prints 5 the first time and it prints 8 the second time. Our program works perfectly well. And now that we understand how variables work, let's just make this program a little better. So let's just make a variable of the int data type because the value 6 over here is an int. So we'll just say int a, where a is the variable name, is equal to 6. So we'll just change all of these values to a. Right, so we changed all our values to a. Now when I run this program, you notice that it prints the value 6 5 times. So it's basically printing whatever value is stored in my variable a. If I want to print something like 3, I can just change it over here to 3. And now it's just going to print the value 3 5 times. And that's it about variables in Java. I really hope you liked this video. Thank you for watching and have a great day.